refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean.
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Welcome to the Fourth Branch Program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch Program. Welcome. For the past 2 years, we have been writing, and for the past year, we have been broadcasting this program under the banner America in Crisis. It is pointless to mention the reason behind it. Also already determined that it has to do with the presidency of Donald Trump. Yes and no. You see, America has been in a state of crisis well before Donald Trump even fathomed the idea of bidding for the presidency of the United States, let alone becoming the 45th president. As such, this program is simply a continuation of what the country has been going through, but exacerbated under the administration of Donald Trump. As mentioned before, Donald Trump is not responsible for the state of affairs in the country. Oh yes, the past 2 years, Democrats in particular have been pointing fingers to the presidency, to the current administration. And judging by the type of individual Donald Trump is, everybody points fingers to him as being responsible for the state of affairs, for the state of chaos, for the tumultuous state in the country. But I mentioned before in this program last week that Donald Trump is much too ignorant to cause this type of problem in the country. He is a crooked man, a crooked businessman. He is an idiot, he is an egocentric, he is a racist, but he doesn't have the intelligence to cause the type of chaos the country has been going through. One thing is certain, that all parties, members of the Republican Party, are having a ball. For the first time, they all can hide behind one individual and do whatever damage that they deem necessary to do to the country. You see, for the past few decades, 7+ decades, Republicans have always posed as being the patriot, the defenders of the nation, the party with the highest level of morality, the fiscally conservative party. And yet, if you look at any of those values that Republicans have claimed to have, they have not lived up to those values at any point in the history that they've been claiming that they have those values. Donald Trump, being a street-smart individual, have exploited that weakness in the Republican Party. And it's not just the constituent, but what the individual that we call Republican leaders, if they can be so called, have exposed their constituent to this type of problem. You see, Donald Trump was never a Republican. by any stretch of the imagination, Donald Trump has lived a life of Democrats, a liberal. And yet, when he decided he wanted to jump into politics, he went to the Republican Party. And there is a reason for that. It's because the Republican Party has always opened the gate for whoever, whatever whichever crook decide to join, as long as that will help them to continue the process of destroying the very institution that we have, the very institution which have made the United States the envy of the world. Now, it may sound like ranting, it may sound like garbage or gibberish, but look at the facts. The Russians tried to infiltrate the Democrat Party. They did try to get someone in the Democrat Party to join the fray, but they failed. But they didn't have any problem finding as many people as possible and necessary in the Republican Party in order to infiltrate our country, in order to do damage to our institution. And the Russians are not alone. We had people from the Middle East. They all found one weakness in our country, the Republican Party. And it's not just the Republican constituent, but the Republican leaders, those very individuals we elected to represent us, they do not have any level of morality, any level of decency that would tell them what they're doing would be detrimental to the country. All they see is it's going to benefit them, they will go along with it. George Washington did warn us about those type of individuals. He said to guard against the imposture of those who pretend to be patriots. And yes, the Republican Party, the leaders have always claimed to be patriots and defenders of the Republic. Now, they've always blamed the Democrats for being too liberal, for being too open to what they call immorality. And yet, by any analysis, Republicans have always been the party that destroy the institution, the fabric of our country. Yes, they talk a big game. They have a lot of good words. They're Christian conservative. They're fiscally conservative. They're patriot in words and in words alone. As such, Donald Trump cannot be held accountable for the state the country is in. We're not defending Donald Trump. He has certainly played a role in exacerbating the situation the country has been going through. There is no doubt about that. But Donald Trump is too much of a moron to cause the type of damage the country has been going through. The Republican leaders have taken advantage of that fact because everybody is pointing fingers to Donald Trump. So gleefully, the Republican leaders hide behind Donald Trump to continue to do the damage that they've always done to the country. Consider this. Donald Trump has done to the country everything that we've always stood against. And yet, all the members of the Republican Party have lined up behind him to defend him, to support him. Now, you should ask yourself the question, are those people stupid? Are they ignorant? They are legislators who understand what it means to be loyal, who understand what it means to uphold the Constitution. And yet, despite all the signs, despite everything that points to the fact that Donald Trump is in bed with an enemy, all the Republican leaders join him. They're not stupid, they simply accomplice. Consider this. In the month of July, between the month of July and the beginning of the month of August, Republicans have made 3 separate trips to Moscow. 3 delegations of Republican leaders had visited Moscow. And up to today, we have absolutely no idea what they went to Moscow for, what they discussed. Of course, they told us it was about trying to establish a good relationship, a good rapport with Kremlin. This is a very easy way to simply not tell us what those visits were about. But more specifically, during those trips to Moscow, they excluded Democrats. How fitting that during the time that we have in the Oval Office an administration accused of being in bed with an enemy, the Kremlin, you have the Republican Party, their leaders, 3 separate delegations dispatched to Moscow who refused to give any account for what they did go to that country for. At one point, Rand Paul was leading one of the delegations, carried a letter from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin. Now, you may be naive, or you may accept whatever explanation that the Republicans give you as to the reason that they went to Moscow. One, it is highly unlikely during 1 month, just 1 month, 3 separate delegations of a political party visit a country which is an arch enemy of the United States. Second, they excluded the other political party from being part of that delegation. And third, they never gave any account as to what was discussed. Something is definitely not right with the Republican Party. So it's not just Donald Trump who was in bed with Moscow. The Republicans have lined up behind Donald Trump because they too have something to hide. Because by any analysis, those Republican legislators, they're not that stupid. They've been in Washington long enough to see a problem when there is a problem. And by any analysis, Donald Trump has been a problem for the country. And yet, there was absolutely nothing that was done in order to figure out what it was. If anything, members of the Republican Party have worked aggressively to prevent, to derail, to slow down any investigation to that matter. And if you ask yourself the very question as to why people like Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, Trey Gowdy, Devin Nunes have been trying the hardest in order to stop the Robert Mueller investigation, don't ask that question because the answer is rather obvious. It's not just Donald Trump that was involved with Moscow. Leaders of the Republican Party are very much the problem the country has been going through. America is indeed in a crisis. And that's not a crisis caused by Donald Trump. It's a crisis that resides exclusively in the Republican Party. I'll be right back.
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective
is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. Anyone who has lived in the United States for the past decade, looking what has transpired the past 2 years, must be confused as to whether Republicans are naturally ignorant or there is something more to it. And the saddest part of this predicament is the fact that the problem trickled down to the least intelligent in the Republican circle. This is the state of affairs for the United States of America since Donald Trump has become the 45th president. Now, I mentioned that the problem trickled down to the least intelligent in the Republican circle, and this is not something that just happened. From a whopping 54% of the Republicans' constituents believing that Barack Obama was not even American, to 92% supporting an individual who has lied his way into everything. We all should be scratching our head as to whether there is anyone in the Republican Party who is left with some degree of knowledge, of sense, of which, at the very least, some level of decency. The picture you're looking at is one of the delegation of the Republican from the Republican Party spending, you guessed it, the 4th of July in Moscow. Yes, the 4th of July, one of the most important dates in our history. We have a Republican delegation, exclusively, no Democrat included, in Moscow, celebrating 4th of July. There is absolutely no way to explain the behavior. Especially, now, I can give some kind of slack to the constituents who I have been saying all along that they really don't know what they're doing. They naturally ignorant. But the behavior of legislators and elected officials who should know better. Are they under some sort of spell? Have they lost their minds? You see, even the biggest fanatics, Donald Trump fanatics, individuals who are deprived, seemingly, of the ability to reason, have admitted that something is not right. Even the least intelligent individual who voted for Donald Trump, they came to the conclusion that something is not right with the administration. Now, if those individual constituent people that you can clearly say by the way that they think, by the way that they behave, by the way that they reason, that their level of intelligence is low, they could come to that conclusion, how much more so the legislators in Washington. And yet, we have the leaders of the Republican Party doing everything that is contrarian to what this country stands for. It's not by sheer accident. It's not because Donald Trump is so influential. We know that's not the case because they all behind the scene been bashing Donald Trump. So what exactly happened? They are accomplices to the very problem that the country went through during the 2016 election. Yes, a number of Republican leaders were part of that problem. So it wasn't just Donald Trump in bed with Moscow. Republican legislators, leaders of the Republican Party were in bed with the Kremlin. That's why they moving heaven on earth they try everything humanly possible in order to make certain that whatever it is that they were involved in, nobody get to find out about it. Yes, as I mentioned, Donald Trump could not have possibly pulled that all by himself. He's not smart enough. We all know that. We've seen Donald Trump in action. We've seen him talking. He cannot even follow a script that's provided to him, let alone come up with his own way of thinking. He is incapable of that. So to anyone who has even average intelligence, it should be pretty obvious that the members of the Republican Party are as involved with Russia as Donald Trump was. And that should help to explain why they too want to put a brake on the investigation. They want to prevent the report from coming out. They want to do everything humanly possible so that the public doesn't see that it wasn't just Donald Trump doing that. Yes, Donald Trump was in bed with Moscow. We know that. April 12, 2017, 1 month before Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel, I published an article that clearly says that, well, Donald Trump was in bed with Moscow. There is no surprise here. There is nothing that's coming out today that any surprise to myself or many of the individuals that have been following this particular problem closely. But what should come as a huge surprise is how many Republican legislators in Washington were involved with Donald Trump. And that should scare the hell out of anyone who is a patriot American. It is a chilling thing that the only individual, and that's the reason all the Republicans, they feel so happy about the fact that all the fingers are pointed to Donald Trump. They are elated about that particular thing. Everybody is looking at one individual, Donald Trump. And they think, well, that's the best thing that has happened to the Republican Party. Because nobody is looking at them, everybody is pointing fingers at Donald Trump. But behind the scene, they have been working, they have been trying everything possible to make certain that they do not become the news. How else would you explain that they have made 3 separate trips, Now, the idea was to establish a good rapport with Russia. Why not do that to about North Korea? Why not do that to Iran? Why not do that to about Syria? They're all enemies of the United States. Don't we need a good rapport with them too? Not a single trip has been taken to any of those countries I just mentioned by any Republican delegation. But somehow, it has to make sense that, well, we want to have a good rapport with Russia. Yes, the Republican Party has not been working towards the well-being of the United States. They have been working for their own selfish agenda, no matter what it takes. The hell with the United States. The hell with democracy. The hell with freedom. They're spending their independence in Moscow, for God's sake. What do you expect? The Republican Party is compromised.
Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
War on blacks. If you join us for the first time, let me set the stage for you about this particular topic in our program. War on Blacks is a program that discusses race relations in America. And the title was picked to point to the fact that there have been casualties in that war. Now, there are two major aspects of this program that I always point out for those who have joined for the first time. I strongly encourage you to go to the People Branch YouTube channel so that you can take a look at, watch the previous episode that we've put out there. They're all archived on the People Branch YouTube channel, in which we discussed we presented a number of details of this particular program. But as we propose to repeat every single time we have this program, we're going to say what we have been saying all along. In race relations in America, there are two major groups. There are millions of whites who are racist and who discriminate, and there are millions of whites who are not racist, who do not discriminate. Thus, the biggest problem to solve race relations in America, because it is very difficult to just meet someone on the street and know which group that individual belongs to. There is nothing that provides that type of information. But we know that is the case. And the reason is because today, racism, discrimination, rampant in the United States. Now, we say that in order to solve this problem, we have to at least recognize or acknowledge that there are three major factors, three major three major important points to keep inside in consideration. One, we have to acknowledge that the problem exists. You cannot solve a problem unless you agree that there is a problem. Second, we have to understand the problem. Now, acknowledging the problem is only one aspect, but that doesn't solve the problem in and of itself. The problem has to be understood. If you remember when Ebola, a few years ago, there was a outbreak of Ebola. Now, across the world, there was an acknowledgement that, yes, we have a problem. But the second aspect, that the problem, in that case, the disease, had to be understood. So the scientific community was racing to understand the problem in order to bring a cure. And in the process, that there were a few victims, even here in the United States. And the third aspect of solving a problem is for the parties to communicate. Now, even if a cure were found for the Ebola, now, if those individuals were affected, exposed, or in danger of being affected by the disease, never communicated that, we would have still be talking about the disease today. Because the concerned parties have to communicate. The same principle applies for race relation in America. First, we have to acknowledge that the problem exists. Now, I mentioned several times that the acknowledgement varies among various groups, because not every group understands the problem the way the problem is. So there is already right there in the first bulleted point, there is already a problem. That the acknowledgement that racism, discrimination rampant in America, because different groups see it differently. There is even group that seem to think, oh, there is no problem. If you remember, when Obama was elected president of the United States in 2009, many of those people came on and made the statement, wow, racism is over. The country just elected a black man. No more racism. So, acknowledging the problem is necessary and important. Understanding the problem is the second most important aspect of solving the problem. Now, the understanding part is what we're trying to bring forth in this discussion by trying to go as far back in history as possible to set the stage as to where the roots of the problem, but rather as to why this still continues up to today. And that's where that takes us to slavery, the slave trade. Of course, the past few weeks we've been discussing the rebellion. And the past few days we've been discussing bloody rebellion, the bloody aspect of the rebellion. Now, I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, it is not a discussion about slavery itself. It's not a discussion to present all the different aspects of what happened during slavery, and it's not a class about slavery. The very aspect of pointing and picking that period in time is simply to be able to establish, to show at least as to how this problem of racism has taken root and evolved up to today. That's the only reason we go back to slavery, not to give you a class in slavery, a course in slavery, and discussing all the various aspects of it. A number of individuals
who have made comments seems to think that's what this is about. It is not. Now, we are at the point where we're talking about the bloody aspect of the rebellion. What that means is we move from the period where slaves were just trying to escape slavery and try to reach freedom, to coming to a point where they understand that not only it was difficult to do so, but also they were paying a very heavy price to just want to escape slavery. We left last time discussing about John Brown, a white man who was fed up, who was disgusted by the practice of slavery in America, and decided he had to do something about it. Now, a few people who have commented, and even during time historians were collecting information, a number of people that they talk to seem to want to make excuses about slavery by saying that was the time, as if it was some sort of I'm not sure exactly what they thought slavery was, in terms of everybody, it's as if everybody was doing it. It was the time. Actually, not everybody was doing it. We learned that not only in the north part of the country, but there were a lot of people, white, who knew and didn't participate in that. As I started to show you, now John Brown is just an example. He wasn't alone. There are groups of people across the country that were working to end slavery. They were having group discussion, do different type of activities, in the hope at some point that they would put an end to that inhuman treatment of other groups of people. So no, it wasn't the time, because it wasn't something that everybody was in. It was the most despicable thing to do. Abraham Lincoln, who became the president, who signed the executive order, the act, the Emancipation Act, he did not have slaves. His parents did not have slaves. John Brown, that I'm discussing at this point and showing you to which extent he was disgusted by it, he didn't have slaves. His parents didn't have slaves. No, it wasn't the time. It was a group of people in the South, white individual in the South, who did not have any sense of decency, who believed that it was okay to do, all the while they were claiming to be Christian. In fact, if you know history in this country, you'll find that there are a number of things, especially with that have the flavor, the religious flavor. The people in the South, they always claim on a high horse to be religious, and they cannot go along with it. They're always on their high horse. And yet, there were the exact same people who were slave owners, who were subjecting blacks to inhuman treatment, all the while they were going to church. The South, the whites, at that time, in the South, were the most hypocritical group of people in the nation. Pretend to be Christian, pretend the love of God, while they were doing what even the devil would not do.
Now, in order to understand the bloody rebellion, I have to set the stage for you, because the slave did not just wake up one day and wanted to kill white slave owners. They were subjected to treatment that even reading about it would get you to shed tears, let alone being the subject of those treatments. Now, this is part of history that we always say this is a dark period in our history. But this is where all conversation about slavery ends, as if this is over, then everybody should go about their business because, well, this is over. Except for one problem. We black are still living the aftermath of slavery. The damages done by slavery to the country, the aftermath, whites may feel that this is over, they don't have any more slaves, everybody should go about their business. But except for one problem, they have set a system which continue to hinder blacks from making progress. They have set a system, they have put a system in place that create this predicament that today, in mid-21st century, we're still talking about racism in America. And as I mentioned before, it is not the white supremacists, it is not the white nationalists who are causing the problem. Those individual, very small group of people. But racism, discrimination across the country, rampant in the country. So no, those people, they just scapegoat. This is not to say what they're doing is right, what they're thinking, etc. But I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, the neighbor next door who doesn't like me because I'm black does not do anything to me. It doesn't change anything about me. It doesn't make me less poor, it doesn't make me richer, it doesn't make me sick, it doesn't make me healthier. It simply doesn't impact me. But what we blacks and any decent individual should not stand for is institutionalized racism. And you will see why white believe it was necessary, whether it just instinctively, but they figured that it was necessary to set system in place to prevent blacks from advancing, from progressing. Now, again, as I say, you could say slavery is over. Yes, everybody could have moved on, except for one problem. All the systems set in place beyond slavery, they still exist. That's why today we still have racism and discrimination rampant in the country. And we will, of course, continue to talk about institutionalized racism. And as soon as we move on from the slavery time and get a little bit closer to our time, we will debate in greater detail those institutionalized technique, strategy used by those who may either descendant of slave owners or individuals who have joined the group and continue to make certain that institutionalized racism continue to exist. I mentioned it before, no one is born racist. So if we're talking about racism in America today, it's not because individuals those who were who are descended of slave owners, they are the people who are practicing racism and discrimination in the country. They're not just those people. In fact, some of them may even have been disgusted by that and move away from it. But regardless, we still have that in the country. So why? I mentioned if you look at a job application, whether online or a physical application, you see at the bottom in fine print, we are an EEOO company. That's always tickled me. It means Equal Employment Opportunity Organization. Now, there is not a single, and I mean not a single job application that you take, you download that doesn't have that. Every job application has that. So, if that's the case, then we should not be talking about racism in America, because every company is EEOO. So, what's the problem? Everybody is Equal Employment Opportunity Organization. Everybody has nothing to do with racism and discrimination. Everybody, nobody is racist. Nobody practices discrimination. And yet, mid-21st century, racism and discrimination is as widespread as, well, the stars. Why is that?
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
Now, why are we still talking about racism in America? In order to understand that, we took a short trip to slavery, the time of slavery. We have been talking about it, and we are at the point where it starts getting very tiring for the slaves. It starts getting late in the process for them to believe anything that the white slave owners told them in terms of freedom. So there was no more, they would not believe anymore. You may have remembered that I mentioned about Denmark Vesey. He was a slave for 20 years, and after 20 years he purchased his freedom. Now the white slave owners, they used him as a way to temper the eagerness of slaves who wanted to just get the hell out of the predicament. So while they were using Denmark Vesey to preach to those slaves that if you're obedient, or if you just do what you're supposed to do, you don't cause any trouble, at some point you will be able to also purchase your freedom. Now, this was not a widespread thing in terms of it was very specific slaves who could actually purchase their freedom. Slaves mostly who were involved in helping their slave owners in trade, those type of activities. But slaves who were purchased mostly for plantation in order to help their master becoming richer and richer, those slaves, there were no the possibility for them to become free in the beginning anyway was almost impossible, non-existent. But nevertheless, white slave owners thought Denmark Vesey would help them. Now, we already talked about three different people. We talk about Gabriel Prosser, born in 1775. At 24 years old, he was the first black slave leader who organized in order to escape slavery. Now, again, I really strongly suggest you take a look to the previous step because I don't want to go through all the detail again and again about those particular aspects of the discussion. But Gabriel Prosser was the first one, and we have Denmark Vesey was the second one in 1822, was the second one, and we had in 1835, then we have Nat Turner. Now, all three of those people, they were caught, they were executed along with other people or other slaves who were helping them. Now, John Brown, which is where we are today, contrary to the three people I just mentioned who were slaves, John Brown was no slave. John Brown was a white man who was disgusted about slavery. He knew that was unacceptable for any human being to inflict those type of treatment to other human beings. John Brown decided that he had to do something about that. But although John Brown was considering that, but it became almost what you would call a calling for John to make certain that what he had, the plan that he had to put an end to slavery, the plan would succeed. Now, I mentioned last time that something interesting about John Brown, he wasn't alone. He took 5 of his sons. That's how determined John Brown was. He enlisted 5 of his sons to participate in the plan to end slavery. Now, this is beyond someone who is
unselfish, because he could have gone by himself and tried to do what he had in mind. He could have. It still would have been one of the greatest things anyone has done, because you imagine he wasn't a slave. He didn't have anyone. He wasn't in any way associated with slavery. He didn't have slaves. He wasn't even living in that part of the world. He was born in Connecticut. He moved to Ohio. And then at some point in his time, he decided that he heard enough talk about ending slavery. So he said, you know what, those people, they've been talking. It's time we do something about it. So he's a guy, white guy, while we have in the South, white individuals who were subjecting black to the most inhuman treatment. Now you have in other parts of the country, whites, because blacks could not possibly do anything about it. They were slaves. Now you have in other parts of the country, whites who are putting their lives on the line to end slavery. That's why up to today, when we're talking about race relation, it's difficult, because we still have those two groups of people in the country. Whites who are racist and who continue to discriminate. And then you have the other side, whites who are not, who want to put an end to this problem in the country. This is the biggest dilemma the United States has. So John Brown enlisted 5 of his sons, and in 1850 he traveled to Kansas, and he went there to fight a pro-slavery group. And he wanted to, for whatever reason, he chose that place, maybe as a pilot program. I don't know. History didn't provide that information, but I would suggest maybe that was the case, because he wanted to find out maybe how successful he would be claiming one small town at a time, and then there trying to spread the movement. Or maybe because there was that town nearby that was called Lawrence, that was a town mostly whose residents were mostly individuals who were against slavery. For whatever reason that he chose that part of the country, he traveled to Kansas, and he went to confront a pro-slavery group. And because they became aware of John Brown's presence in the area, the pro-slavery group, on May 21st, they decided to raid the town, Lawrence, that is, the town whose residents are mostly anti-slavery. Now, according to historical record, it looks like Brown wasn't there when that happened. So when he got word of what the pro-slavery group did, he decided that we're not going to just do nothing. We have to retaliate. So that happened on May 21st, and on May 25th, Brown went with his son, not even anybody else, just Brown and his son. They went to attack a cabin there, and they end up killing 5 white men. And from that point, you can imagine it was a war, guerrilla war, if you like. Now, we're not sure exactly what happened between after that time, but history reported that in 1857, Brown left Kansas and returned to the east, northeast that is, and he began to raise money in order to have a mass uprising to free the slaves. Now, one thing that I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, up to this point that we're talking about, Brown has been doing all that without ever talking to a slave, to a black slave, without even approaching any slave and say, you know, I'm doing this for you, I want you to join me. He was doing it with his son, his family. He put his life and the life of his family on the line to end slavery. Yes, a white man. While in the South, you have white men that were putting slaves through inhuman treatment. Yes, there have always been in the United States of America two groups of whites. Those who are racist and those who are not. Brown didn't have a stake on that. Now, if we look at a lot of the other people that were doing a lot of the talking and trying to do a lot of planning in order to end slavery, they did have a stake on it. Because some of them were people who aspired to politics. Some of them imagined that if they did it right, they would increase their stature, and so on and so forth. Historical record clearly shows that John Brown had no agenda to become anything politics. He had no agenda to raise his status. He just believed it was not okay. It was disgusting for those white slave owners to continue to inflict those pain, those treatments on blacks. That's all he had as a reason to want to end slavery. And in 1857, he went back to the Northeast and he started to raise money. Money for one reason, one purpose, to free the slaves. And he managed to actually get the backing of 6 other prominent abolitionists. Now, those are the people I mentioned before that while they too wanted to end slavery, but they were being very cautious about the whole thing because they didn't want to die. They want to live so that when things turn right, they could really prop themselves and say, I was always against slavery. But John Brown took the step of putting his life on the line. And he knew. It's not something he did. No, he knew that he could lose his life. And yet, he didn't back down. He got, not only managed to raise money, but he also got the backing of 6 prominent abolitionists. Now, notice I say backing, not participation. They back him, they say, we're with you. That's all. We're with you, we're fighting for that too, but we're not going to participate in the uprising. Meaning, we know what may happen to you, and we want to be alive so that if you succeed, we take credit, but if you die, we're still there. So John Brown assembled an invasion force, and for the first time, for the very first time, he decided to include blacks in the movement. He got an army of 22 people, 22 men, 17 white, 5 blacks. And out of those 17 men was Brown
and 3 of his sons. That is one of the most important story of a white man who had the decency to understand what was being done to a group of people who could not change their fate, and he decided at the cost of his life and that of his family, and he said, we're going to put an end to slavery. Yes, it was not the time, like some people want to report. Some whites who are always trying to make excuses for doing the wrong thing. It was the time whites were just, slave owners. No, there were plenty of whites who weren't slave owners. There were many whites who hated or disgusted by slavery. It was not the time. It was, unfortunately, the most hypocritical behavior of white men who pretended to be good people, good men, good religious men, and yet doing what even the devil would not dare doing. They were, by any definition, monsters. Not good people like they're trying to portray. They weren't good people. If you are a descendant of slave ownership, let me be the first to tell you, your ancestors were not good people. The things that they did to slaves do not qualify them as good people. They were monsters. You only get a story of your ancestor. Oh, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa, good man. He was a good husband, a good father. Maybe he was, but he wasn't a good man. He was a monster. Now, John Brown managed to raise money, had an army of 22 people, 5 blacks, 17 people. 4 of those 17 people were his family. Maybe because he felt more comfortable in the Northeast. I don't know. Maybe that's the case because he was in Kansas after they attacked the pro-slavery group and killed 5 men, whether he was just running away from law. But whatever the case was, after that, he moved east. And he managed to raise money, get 22 people with him, including himself and 3 members of his family, 5 blacks, and they rented a farm near a place called near Harper's Ferry. And the reason for that is because it was a strategic location to help end slavery. Maryland, it had weapons, it had food, it had storage, and on top of that, close to Virginia, Virginia was a bastion for slavery. Remember I mentioned to you before that the first shipment of slavery actually happened in Jamestown, Virginia. And Virginia was pretty much almost Virginia was so good at that during that period of time that they called to authority in Virginia for tips on how to deal with slaves in other parts of the country. because Virginia had become so good at quelling uprising, revolt, at punishing slaves, and so on and so forth. So maybe, not because history has reported it, but that's just my speculation, that maybe John Harper figured out that since this is the strategic place for slavery, and this is where things started, maybe, just maybe, even from a symbolic perspective, if he managed to just destroy that area, to recapture the area, maybe slaves in other parts of the country would feel emboldened enough for them too to rise up. Whatever the case was, that's where it started. October 16, 1859. Now, if you're following this story, you have to start noticing something that's been happening more and more frequently. 1800, Gabriel Prosser tried to escape slavery. He failed. 1822, Denmark Vesey, that's 22 years later, Denmark Vesey tried to escape slavery. Well, when I use the name of those people as leaders, but they had other slaves with them. He failed. 1835. Now, keep in mind, those are important uprisings. Not because there were no uprising in between, before and after, but there were smaller ones. Those were more or less organized uprisings. 1835, Nat Turner tried and failed. And there were a bunch of other smaller ones that happened in between. And we got to John Brown. John Brown, who's been doing everything possible. And listen to this, maybe just purely coincidental. Gabriel Prosser was captured in 1800 and executed. John Brown was born in 1800. Nat Turner was born in 1800. Those are abolitionists and people who tried to end slavery. Maybe that was the time, the year for them. But whatever the case was, in 1859, now after John Brown left a few, maybe he was in Kansas to kind of put the seed. But whatever the case was, he traveled to the east. He was in Maryland. He and 22 men rented a farm near Harper's Ferry, and they were preparing for an assault. In October 16, 1859, Brown and his 22 men went and overran an arsenal. Now, as I mentioned before, the idea was it was a strategic location for them, not only to get their hands on weapons, to get their hand on all kind of tools that would help carry out the plan. Did he succeed? We will continue this conversation about how far did John Brown get in his pursuit of putting an end to slavery.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such
in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. I do thank you for spending the time with me, and I hope the information has been enlightening. If you have questions, suggestions, comment, criticism, do not hesitate to contact us. And if you have a topic you would like us to research and discuss here on the Fourth Branch program, do get in touch. We would like for you to participate in what we're doing here. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful evening. See you tomorrow.
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at
peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.